So now we can move on to our side front panel. So we don't have a center front to line up our lengthwise grain with, and that's why we pulled down the center here. So we're going to start by just feeling for the center line of our side front. We're going to line up our cross grains with our waistline and our bust line. So pin at that center point there with an anchor. Make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Now we can smooth up to our bust line. Pin that in with an anchor. And in order to make sure that everything's on grain, I want to go ahead and smooth that bust line across that tape to make sure it's all lined up nice and neatly. Pin over to your princess right here, and over to your side right here. And you want to do the same thing at the waist. Just double check that everything will land correctly once you begin cutting. Now obviously we can't spread this across from the princess to the side seam because it begins pulling, and we're going to have to cut into the muslin to allow it to spread. So we're going to start with the bust up here. Now you can see there's a lot of muslin here we don't need because it's outside of the top of our piece. So I'm just going to go ahead, secure a little bit more of this bust level, and more, and clip off all this extra stuff. Get rid of that housekeeping. Now I'm going to start smoothing to the side seam first, because our heaviest curve is going to be at the side of the bust. Now I want to get this side seam nice and accurate before I begin all of that cutting work. So at the bust, we'll start by smoothing over our side seam, move down a little bit, pin, down, and this. You might find it useful to pin this lengthwise grain down the dress form as well, just to make sure that doesn't shift as you're working. Now I'm pinning in opposite directions so that it doesn't pull off while I'm working. Now I'm smoothing from the center lengthwise over to our side seam, being careful not to pull. I'm using a very light hand to keep everything nice and smooth. Now I can begin clipping into that side seam. Careful not to go too close. Now it looks like we're pushing quite a bit of ease down to the waistline, but let's deal with that once we get down to the waist. And there, I'm going to start clipping down and across into our side seam at the waist. Now, same as the front, I'm cutting across the waist cross grain to allow that to separate at that contour line. I'm going to unpin this and smooth that a little more. Okay. Okay, I'm going to pin down this lengthwise grain. I can finish this bottom quarter here. Smooth down and across. So we got that super smooth line and panel from the back half of our side front panel. Now let's begin our front panel. Front of our side front panel. Now if we were to smooth this over, look at all that pulling, and you can even feel this getting really tight as we're going. So we can start pulling this waistline over, realizing here is where we're going to clip. So we can go right into this cross grain. See if that lets us get to our princess seam. Princess line is here. I'm going to clip a little more. There we go. So I'm going to see if I can throw a pin in at the intersection of our waistline and our princess seam. So it's pulling quite a bit here and really here. So we're going to start by cutting up into this lengthwise grain. We're going to cut across, up, across, and up, and then we'll eventually clip into towards the princess line and see if we can alleviate this pulling. Almost. So over, up, that's not happy. Maybe we pulled it too far, bringing it over to the waist. So let's try cutting up and across here. And see how that looks now. Look at that. Nice and smooth. Okay. So if we were to smooth this over, nice and neat, you can see that the bottom of the waist tape is here, and our waistline is pitching down. So that must be an issue with our lengthwise grain. So let's unpin this and maybe shift the bodice over a little bit. And when you get to wider panels such as this, and you're draping the waistline, It's okay if it's not perfect. It's okay to be about an eighth off because our waistlines are never technically straight. Now, we would keep the waistline straight and perfect if we were dividing this into two separate panels. So if we were draping a side front and a back side front, we would go ahead and keep that as lined up with the waist tape as possible. Now for this one, it's okay if it comes down a little bit towards the edges. So now that that is all lined up, pin that in, straighten out center line. Pull here, down, and pin. Going to secure at the bottom. Now we can begin the difficult task of contouring this underbust. So we're going to need to clip a lot closer into the princess line as usual. So I'm going to go ahead and get off this extra piece here and clip closer to my princess line. Smooth over from our lengthwise grain, over from my lengthwise grain, and then up towards the bust. Pin princess, okay, so I've reached the edges of my clips. I'm gonna keep clipping. Over and up. Over and up. So look how smooth that is so far, up to the underbust. Then we're going to begin this curve. Now, you can see here, this grain line is pulling. I did something wrong. So you can't just pull that back up into place. So, I'm gonna unpin and try this again. Put that bust line back in place. Pin it to make sure it doesn't happen again. All right, let's start with the waist. A couple more. There we go. Pin. Good. Now, over and up. So I'm feeling quite a bit of tension right here at the underbust. So I'm going to try clipping in a little bit more. Now this is where drafting or draping cups comes in handy. So if you feel a lot of tension here and your model or your customer has a very full bust, it's going to be nearly impossible to drape a perfect princess seam because that curve of that seam is going to become way too steep. Then, in that case, you will end your foundation as an underbust and you will drape separate patterns to cover the contour of the bust. Now this dress form is cutting it pretty close. Feels like I'm pulling a little bit on the grain line. Oops. But for the sake of this drape, I'm going to keep it as is. It's pretty difficult to get this convex curve here to look perfect. See, there's quite a bit of ease between the underbust and the apex. Go ahead, secure this underbust. Now we can do the same thing that we did with the apex at our front. We're going to clip into the muslin up to that princess line. Add a few. And we can start overlapping our clips. Okay. There's a little bit of ease in there, but it's nothing we can't fix when it's flat. Okay. So now all we have left is the top of this bust curve. So we can unpin that. We can start draping up the princess line. Remember, you want to keep this lengthwise grain straight. Let's pin that in place. And start going over. I'm going to meet in the middle here. See if I can't push all of that ease up past the edge of the foundation. Now all we have left is this top left quadrant. Easy. Now if you are getting any pulling as you're pinning this in place, you can go ahead and clip down towards the top of your foundation mark. There you have it, your side front bodice, nice and smooth, grain lines straight, and following our guidelines. Now we can go in with our sharp pencil and begin. this. Wait, that's the... There we are. Princess line marked. You can go ahead and up it. Our side front. Now, this is the most difficult part to drape. So, now, we're off to the easy ones.